Let's start with a question. How many people out there are exhausted and how many people are energized? Now, you don't have to answer just yet, but my goal over the next 18 minutes is to energize you. And we're gonna do that in the context of the amazing talks we've already heard, because you're gonna hear three themes: time, purpose, and action. So there's a lot of reasons why we might be exhausted. There's a lot of geopolitical issues right now all over the world. For people who are running their companies, it's really interesting to see, that there's issues that are associated with supply chain, and there's issues with healthcare. There's issues with a lot of different things. But the three questions that I have for people to think about is what and how can we optimize our time remaining? How can we think about what are we willing to suffer for? And the final one is, what is our best next step? And so the first question is, how can we optimize our time remaining? And when you think about that, that could be for today, that could be for next week, or that could be for the next 100 years. This one's interesting in that 8 or 9 or 10 out of 10 people are in this zone. And that is amazing, right? So that's 60% of people. So 60% of you are 8, 9, or 10, but that means that 40% of you are 7 or lower. And that's quite fascinating when you take those numbers and you smash them up on a net promoter scale. Because I think this slide might actually help us in terms of trying to understand where are we in terms of the people who are in the audience right now. And maybe 19% are in what I call the burned out or surviving zone, 52% are fine or okay, and that leaves 28% who are vital. So when we think about what can we do to go from burned out to surviving to fine to vital, how do we get there? So when you're trying to optimize your time remaining, what do you think about? Well, how do you go about doing that? So here's the question that I wanted to have everybody think about. And that is, if you could make a phone call to your future self, what are the three questions? And those are the three questions that we had. Is how can you optimize your time remaining? What are you willing to suffer for? And the final one is, what is your best next step? So those three things are time, and we're going to talk about suffering in the context of purpose, and the final one is really action. So you're all super busy, and how can you say, what is the best next step I can make? And I want to tell you a quick story about going to Cambridge, England. And I just looked it up. Cambridge kind of fights with Oxford about who's the best university, and Cambridge just came out as the second best university in the world yesterday. So they're pretty fascinatingly erudite in England, and Cambridge and Oxford being really fighting with each other. But on the campus is this terrifying creature on this dial, and it's really, really beautiful, but it's also terrifying. And there's an inscription at the base of that. It says, "Time passeth away." So just think about this week. Maybe we started on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, but the time has been slipping away. And what I learned when I was in Cambridge, and I was invited to give a speech about my research with stem cells and platelet-rich plasma, but also about vitality, is that at that Cambridge University is a thing called King's College, and within King's College is a dining room, and we had a beautiful black tie dinner. At the end of the black tie dinner, the orthopedic surgery residents came to the old guy and they said, "Do you want to go to the after party?" Okay? Who knew that in Cambridge, England was a bar that could have been in Vegas? And before I knew it, I was buying tequila shots till 2 in the morning. So they knew how to optimize the day or the time that was remaining. So we'd spent 2 days talking about all these fancy papers, and then they're like, okay, we're gonna take them out, have the American buy us some drinks. This is also in the context of this slide, because this is something that you have all taught me this week, and that's how to be vulnerable. So if you see this picture here, I was a really cute 6-month-old, wasn't I? All right, so we're talking about how to energize somebody. Well, when I was a really young man, little boy, I was a total mama's boy. I'd follow my mom around like a sick Labrador retriever. And that was awesome until it wasn't. And when I was 9, she passed away from a brain tumor. And then I went into a downward spiral. And this man, my 5th grade teacher, Mr. Paul, saved me. And what he saved me was kind of an interesting thing. So here Dave introduced me as this guy who's been at Stanford forever, but in 5th grade, Mr. Paul caught me smoking in the boys' room. Okay, I'm 10 years old at the time, and I have 2 my only two friends were the two juvenile delinquents who had been there before, right? And they got sent immediately to the office, and Mr. Paul rather firmly pushed me up against the wall, and he said something to me that stuck with me to this day. Stop feeling sorry for yourself and respect your future self, okay? So when you have this time remaining, it's very, very important to respect your future self and to think about that in the context of you do not know. Nobody in this room, and maybe it's already passed, but nobody really knows when their last best day will be. So the sands of time are slowly drifting away. And what I want to think about in that context is this. So it's all drifting away, but we're also trying to balance our stress. We're trying to balance our businesses, we're trying to balance our family, we're trying to balance our health, and we're trying to squeeze in some fun, which hopefully we'll have on the golf course this afternoon. But my suggestion for you is, as you're trying to go about optimizing your time remaining and balancing your stress, is to avoid future regret. And how are we going to do that? This is very interesting, and the research and work I've been doing is always based on scientific papers. So I want you to think about this for a second. Your future self is a little blurry past a certain period of time. But this researcher from UCLA named Hirschfeld has done this little thing where you think of your future self as an intersecting circle. The closer you are to your future self, the better your physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being is. Peer-reviewed, published information. So when you're trying to optimize your time remaining, or use the beautiful compass that was given to us by Dave as being speakers, how are you going to do that? How are you going to think about being a savvy investor with your time, talent, and treasure? Here's what I want you to think about. Now, both Ben and Oscar this morning talked about this, and we've been thinking about this a lot. How do we think with time in mind? And does anybody know what this is? That's a picture of a black hole, okay? And I'm a little bit of a science geek, but when you think about, does a black hole really exist? It took 200 scientists from 20 countries more than 10 years to actually take a picture of a black hole. And they did this by pointing a whole bunch of radio telescopes from all over the world, assembling all the images and putting it together. So I have a little bit of an assignment for you. I want you to close your eyes for 15 seconds, okay? What could you do in the next 10 years or 15 years or 100 years? Just think about it. Just roll around in your head. Don't judge whatever idea comes to you, but think about what you could do in the next 10 or 100 years. Some people are already working on it, their 10 or 100-year plan, but don't judge whatever that idea is. Because that is the second question, which is the harder question, is what are you willing to suffer for, okay? Everybody in this room has suffered to build their business, to take care of their family, to maybe monitor whatever health issues they have, but it's so connected to your purpose. And Muhammad Ali helped us understand this, or helped me understand this, is what are we willing to suffer for and live the rest of our lives as a champion? And if you haven't read this book, this is a transformative book by Viktor Frankl, and he was a Nazi concentration camp survivor, but he connected suffering to purpose. So if he was in the Nazi concentration camp in the middle of the horrors of that and realized that I don't even know how he could contemplate this, because how could he even contemplate you're ever going to get out of that? But he realized that by helping his fellow prisoners, he would later become a great psychologist. So he learned, and he took that particular suffering and turned it into the most meaningful part of his life. And this book right here has been read by 12 million people worldwide. So when you're trying to pinpoint your peak purpose, and you're trying to look at that as a lifelong process, don't forget that you're likely going to suffer, but what are you willing to suffer for to do that? And this idea of your peak purpose is so important. And in the research I've been doing on how to optimize your vitality, I really believe it is the foundational component of your physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being. It is brutally hard to do for yourself, for your business. But I want to tell you a little story about why purpose matters. And I know it's one of the P's for an evergreen company. But this is a friend of mine. His name's Dave Kyle. He's been a CEO, like many of you. He's now president of Franworth, which is a franchising company. And a long time ago, he was president of a division, or leader of a division of Ecolab. And their job was to sell soap and linens to hospitals, okay? And his boss basically said to him, listen, you can't have any more money, talk about limitations, right? You can't hire any more people, but I want you to increase the sales of our products, the soap and the linens, to the hospitals. So Dave Very, very optimistic, very proactive, purpose-driven person. Said, okay, listen, we'll have a little retreat with all the sales teams. And then he realized they were dejected. They're like, what do you guys do? Well, we sell soap. Well, what's the data on our soap? What's the data on our linens? Well, they literally help people decrease the risk of developing a hospital-acquired infection. And that's a really brutal thing. You can die from that. So Dave, over the course of just one weekend, rebranded to saying, you're not selling soap, you're saving lives. So when somebody asks the sales guy or gal, what do? I save lives, I don't sell soap. Sales increased the next year by 20%. That's an efficient way to move forward. So when you think about purpose personally, it's very important too. This is a survey of 21,000 people by McKinsey just this year. And the number one and number two things are purpose and having balance in your life. But purpose is also connected to how your brain works. So what I like to do is teach people that literally when you know your purpose better, your brain literally has better connections. It's also your most important modifiable vitality asset. You get to choose what that is for you personally or for your company. It's also associated with lower mortality. So when you're trying to understand what should the purpose of my company be or what should the purpose of my should be, I have two suggestions for you. Is to participate in things like the Tugboat Summit, participate in things that are intrinsically valuable, and then try to be emotionally authentic. The other one is what we've been talking about in terms of serving other people. A couple suggestions. Don't ask what life can give you, but ask what you can give to life, all right? And the other one is, this is a beautiful picture from a hike just from a couple days ago, is stop trying to optimize your life and seek to instead to optimize the lives of others. And this is an amazing example of somebody doing that. And this is from an artist named Bruce Monroe. He's an English artist. But each one of you and your companies has some unique skills and enthusiasm. It's not just your skills, it's your enthusiasm that you can use to transform yourself, your company, your community, and the world. And check that out if you get a chance, by the way. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. So the final thing we're going to talk about is action. And that is, what is your best next step? So the work that I do with Vitality Explorers and Dare to Be Vital is to try to take the friction out of staying vital. But I really do want to energize you. And energy comes from acting, from doing something. So I want you to think really carefully about this next final component of it. You're all in Sun Valley, Idaho at the Tugboat Annual Summit, the 10th one, right? And so the past is behind us, and this nebulous future is in front of us. I've gone crazy a little bit by trying to define now, by the way. Anybody want to help me with that later? But we are right now in the now, and we have two options. We have two things that are in front of us that we could potentially do, and that is take one pathway this way that might lead to future regret, and the other pathway is your best next step. So contemplate for a second, what is the biggest need for your company or yourself? And then what is your most or highest chance of success? That's the intersection of your best next step. So I want you to take an inventory in your head of what your biggest personal or professional need is. Because this is what I do with my class, the companies that I consult with, is I have them create what I call a vitality action plan. And that vitality action plan this is more on a personal level, but it can also be for your company, to think about the physical, mental, social, or spiritual things that you need to work on or you can work on. And this is what I call the Vitality Octagon, and this is all embedded in the book that you can take a look at. But let's turn that into action right here. And I swear I didn't make this up, because people are talking about a to-done list, right? But here's my take on it, is that when I look at the next million seconds, by the way, which is about 12 days, I don't think about a to-do list. I think about a to-done list. And that little change is important. What do I want to have done? And if I put that on that list and I create a little 3x5 card with no more than 3 things in the next 12 days, which is again about 1 million seconds, it changes the mindset of that will be done. It's on my to-done list. So then you can also put that in your pocket and say, look what I did, or what I've done. Think about that one. These are all the things that I think make up vitality or can lead to vitality. And I just have time to highlight two of them. And one of them is closeness with others. And the other one is something that I've learned from one of my vitality students, is a superpower vitality enhancing thing called forgiveness. So let's talk about those two. And then I want to finish with a little discovery that I made about blue zones here during my time at the Tugboat Summit. So loneliness is really an epidemic. It predated the pandemic, but it's incredible how powerful it is in a negative way for your health and literally your ability to stay alive. When you look about social isolation and you look about loneliness, it's up to a third higher for people who have cardiovascular disease or breast cancer. So here's another tip. Remember, we're talking about action. It's going to take you 100 seconds after the talks this morning, just 100 seconds to think and think about 3 people, and especially important if you haven't talked to them in a week or a month, and you just text them and you say, "Hi, John," or "Hi, Susie, I have been thinking about you, hope you're doing well." If you do that with 3 people when we're maybe in between the talks and lunch, watch what's going to happen. You're going to enhance the vitality of the people you text, and then yours is going to rise, and it's cost-free other than about 100 seconds. So we'll finish up with talking about forgiveness. And forgiveness is something that I am really not very good at. I have an elephantine memory, which has been fantastic if you go to medical school and they say, here's a telephone book, memorize it. Here's another telephone book, memorize it. You're trying to remember the steps of a surgical procedure. I have a very, very good memory, which is good and bad, because I sometimes forget that we need to be able to forgive not just other people, but we need to forgive ourselves. And there's such value in this. And I want to go through a little bit of that as a powerful vitality enhancing tool, and then try to answer this question, is forgiveness selfish? So there's a great book out there about this. And again, this was brought to me by one of my amazing vitality students from one of my Stanford classes. And this book talks about forgiveness feels the suffering and loss, mistreatment or betrayal, and then lets it go. Okay, so it's not like you just ignore it, you still feel it. But here's the interesting part. When the suffering is not released, physiologically you start to suffer. It leads to physical issues over time. And so the selfish part of this is, if we forgive other people, it frees up energy to work on your future self, to avoid that future regret of just spending way too much time. So not just my opinion, data. And this is what's kind of fascinating. This woman who gave me this article said, listen, forgiveness, because I want to base it in science. I'm like, that sounds pretty kind of good idea. But this was an international study for almost 4,600 people, Harvard, Stanford, all over the world. And they just did a 2-hour self-directed program on how to enhance your capacity to forgive. Massive decreases in anxiety, depression, and overall improved mental health. So forgiveness is something that you should put on that option, especially if it's not a big deal, to let it go and free up that energy. And I think hopefully will energize you in a way. It's definitely been very important for me over the last 6 months. So we're going to finish up here with this. I hope we're drifting towards the vitality zone. And about 10:30 last night, I knew I had to finish up with something different because I made a discovery yesterday. All right, who's heard of a blue zone? Okay, everybody's heard of a blue zone, right? So a blue zone is sort of these areas around the world where there's enhanced longevity. And there's really 3 things that are connected with these blue zones all over the world: social engagement, family, and physical activity. So I'm sitting around our unbelievable table, and a little light bulb went off. This happened. Okay, I was standing behind as this happened last night. Okay, pause and take that in again. Feel the goosebumps on your arm of what Dave and his team and his lovely family that have supported him. Lisa and Riley are here today. Anybody who's wearing a little blue vest, we need to thank them. But what hit me is this: I discovered a new blue zone. And that blue zone is right here, right now, in Sun Valley, Idaho, okay? And so I think you talk about, being a verified Evergreen company, but what I think this is a verified, what I call, vitality zone. So I really think that this is an unbelievable experience, and I look forward to anybody having any questions afterwards. So thank you very much, and thank you for letting me go over a little bit.